The sun had barely begun to rise over the rolling hills of Kanyemba village, painting the thatched roofs of homes with streaks of gold and amber. Smoke from early morning fires curled lazily into the sky as villagers stirred to life, carrying baskets of yams, cassava, and fresh vegetables to the bustling market square. Chickens clucked and goats bleated, weaving between the feet of children running to greet the day. In the distance, the river gurgled with its gentle melody, reflecting the first hints of sunlight on its rippling surface. The air was thick with anticipation, though no one knew what it heralded. In the heart of the village stood the compound of Adamu, a man whose reputation had grown as large as the baobab tree in the central plaza. Adamu was known for his pride and temper, and though he had built wealth in the trade of kola nuts and ivory, his heart remained narrow, blinded by greed and suspicion. His compound was grand, walls painted with ochre, adorned with intricate carvings of ancestral tales, but the richness of his surroundings only highlighted the poverty of his empathy. Inside the main hut, Adamu's wife, Ayana, moved silently, her bare feet whispering across the smooth clay floor. Her hair was braided in the traditional Kanyemba style, the tight plaits gleaming with beads that clinked softly with each step. She had inherited grace from her mother, a woman known throughout the village for her wisdom and resilience. Yet Ayana's beauty, intelligence, and generosity seemed invisible to her husband. Each morning, she rose before the sun, preparing meals, tending the small garden, and ensuring the children were ready for school, all while hiding a quiet sorrow that weighed upon her like the stones of the riverbed. Today, however, Ayana's eyes shone with an unusual determination. For weeks she had sensed something amiss, a shadow behind Adamu's charming smile that hinted at betrayal. The village was small, and secrets rarely survived the gossip of elders and neighbors. Yet, Ayana had discovered she was not alone in her vigilance. Unbeknownst to Adamu, she had been watching him, observing his interactions, the hidden glances exchanged with visitors who lingered too long, and the whispers he thought vanished into the walls. Her heart pounded not with fear, but with a growing certainty that a reckoning was near. Meanwhile, Adamu strode through his courtyard, barking orders at his servants with the pride of a king and the cruelty of a man who believed power was his alone. His eyes darted to the horizon, unaware that every move he made was under careful observation. "Ensure the yams reach the market by midday," he demanded, "and check that no one talks too freely about my affairs. Do I make myself clear?" The servants nodded hurriedly, fear and respect entwined in their expressions. In the village square, elders gathered under the shade of a massive baobab, their faces lined with years of wisdom and stories etched deep into their skin. Among them was old Mbeni, a storyteller whose voice had carried warnings and lessons for generations. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the compounds and paths, taking note of the subtle tensions weaving through the village. "A storm approaches," he murmured to his companion, Elder Tandy. "I can feel it in the air, in the gossip that rustles like dry leaves. Soon, the winds will not just whisper, they will howl." As the market came alive with traders shouting their wares, Ayana slipped through the crowds, careful to remain unseen. She moved like a shadow, her heart both heavy and sharp with purpose. She overheard hushed voices. "Have you heard what Adamu plans for her?" a woman whispered to her neighbor, clutching her basket of fresh okra. "They say he is not as generous as he appears." Ayana's stomach tightened. She knew the truth was more dangerous than rumors could ever capture. Back at the compound, Adamu prepared for a meeting that would mark the day with treachery. He was to meet a wealthy investor from the city, a man who admired Adamu's cunning and offered him lucrative opportunities. Yet Adamu's mind wandered to thoughts of Ayana. He had grown suspicious of her lately. Her quiet demeanor, her early mornings, her sudden independence. He had convinced himself that power was a game, and in his game, trust was a currency he would never spend lightly. Ayana, meanwhile, remembered the stories her mother used to tell her as a child. Tales of cunning tricksters and proud men who underestimated the women in their lives. "The river that flows quietly carries the strongest currents," her mother's voice echoed in her memory. She smiled faintly, feeling that wisdom settle into her bones. Today, she would watch. Today, she would learn. As midday approached, the air thickened. Birds fell silent. sensing the tension that human hearts could not conceal. Adamu's guest arrived, a man draped in rich fabrics, eyes sharp and calculating. He bowed, exchanging polite words, unaware that Ayana's gaze followed every gesture, noting every nuance, memorizing every expression. Adamu led him into the main hut, speaking of trade, of deals, and of wealth, while Ayana's mind focused on the shadow of betrayal that seemed to cling to her husband like a second skin. Outside, the villagers paused their routines. A mother held her child tighter. A young boy stopped kicking his ball, sensing that the harmony of the village might soon be broken. The elders under the baobab exchanged knowing glances. Old Mbeni tapped his cane, muttering, "The dance has begun!" And soon, the music will reveal its truth. Ayana retreated to a hidden corner of the hut, heart hammering like a drum in the village square. She watched as Adamu presented contracts, signatures, and promises that shimmered with gold and deceit. Each laugh he gave, each gesture of false friendliness, was cataloged in her mind, storing evidence, preserving moments that would one day expose the depth of his betrayal. And then, as if fate itself had orchestrated it, Adamu turned toward her, unaware of the gaze that pierced him, and whispered, "Everything will be mine. Nothing will escape me." Ayana's eyes met his for a fleeting moment. He saw nothing but compliance, while she saw the truth of his arrogance. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, carrying the scent of smoke and earth, and with it came a whisper of impending change. Ayana felt it in her bones, the quiet before the storm. The village held its breath, and the stage was set. Every heart thumped in anticipation, unaware that the first act of tragedy and revelation had begun, and that the next move would shatter everything they thought they knew. And just as the afternoon sun crept to its zenith, a scream erupted from the servants' quarters, a sound sharp, desperate, and raw. It was a signal, though none knew what it meant. Ayana's eyes widened, her pulse racing. Something had shifted. Something unseen had begun to unravel. In that moment, the village knew. The calm had ended, and though the paths of men and women often hide the truth, this day would unveil what lies in shadow. Ayana held her breath, eyes fixed on Adamu, who laughed confidently, completely unaware that she had been watching every secret, every deception, every betrayal. And now, the first domino was about to fall. The morning after the mysterious scream, Kanyemba village was alive, yet a strange tension lingered in the air like a shadow over the sunlit fields. Ayana moved quietly through her compound, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared the fire for the morning meal. Memories of her childhood in the village of Luwanda rose vividly, memories that shaped her patience, her courage, and her sharp mind. She remembered her father, a stern man with hands calloused from years of farming, who often said, "A woman who sees without speaking knows more than a man with eyes and lips." From him, she had learned the power of observation. From her mother, she had learned resilience, the ability to smile in the face of cruelty and to stand even when abandoned. That wisdom had been her armor for years. But now, living with Adamu, her strength was tested daily. Adamu, meanwhile, carried a different story in his bones. Born in the village of Mbale, he had climbed life's ladder with cunning and ambition, leaving behind the humble beginnings of his mother's single hut. The villagers whispered that his heart had hardened when he saw his father cheat a neighbor for a small herd of goats. "Only the clever survive," Adamu would often say, and cleverness, in his mind, justified everything, including deception, cruelty, and manipulation. Yet even as he strutted through his compound, greeting villagers with hollow smiles, cracks in his armor were beginning to show. His wife, Ayana, had always been quiet, but now, the way she moved, the way she observed, made him uneasy. He tried to convince himself it was paranoia. "She is only a woman, soft and frail," he muttered to himself while sharpening his spear, unaware that she had learned long ago that quietness often hides the sharpest blades. The village children, who adored Ayana, played around the edges of the compound, their laughter carrying on the wind. They knew the stories of her kindness, the extra porridge for orphans, the secret lessons taught to children who could not afford schooling. But they also knew of the tension in her home. Whispers had already begun. "Is the chief really as honorable as he seems?" one child asked another. "Why does Ayana often cry when no one sees?" Ayana's younger brother, Jabari, had come to the village to visit. He noticed immediately the heaviness that hung over the compound like a thick fog. "Ayana," he asked softly, "why do you look so troubled? You're the strongest I know." She smiled faintly, hiding the storm within. "Strength is meaningless if it cannot protect the ones you love," she replied, guiding him to a quiet corner. There, she shared fragments of what she had observed. Adamu's secret meetings, the strange gift he received from strangers, and the subtle cruelty he inflicted not only on her but on the household staff. Meanwhile, Adamu's childhood friend Mwangi arrived at the compound. Mwangi's eyes, sharp and calculating, had seen men rise and fall across many villages. He was a businessman now, but his roots were humble, and he respected nothing more than ambition paired with ruthlessness. He greeted Adamu warmly, yet inside he questioned the changes he had seen. "You have grown richer, Adamu, but your heart, it has grown colder," Mwangi thought, noting the tension in the air. That evening, the market square became alive with gossip. Women, with baskets balanced on their heads, whispered about the disturbances in Adamu's household. "Have you seen Ayana?" one elder asked another, shaking her head. "She walks as if she carries the weight of the sun." The village children repeated phrases they had overheard adults say, their young voices carrying the tension through the dusty streets. The elders, seated under the baobab, exchanged knowing looks. Old Mbeni muttered, "When the whispers begin to take root, the tree of deception is ready to fall." At home, Adamu sat with Mwangi, discussing trade and investments, but his mind kept returning to Ayana. He had noticed subtle changes, how she lingered longer at the window, how she listened more than she spoke, how her gaze seemed to penetrate him. "She has always been clever," he admitted quietly to Mwangi, "but lately she is watching, and watching is dangerous." Mwangi's eyes narrowed. "A man who underestimates the eyes of a woman will soon find himself blind," he said, echoing an old proverb. Meanwhile, Ayana kept meticulous notes of every incident, the whispered threats, the sudden gifts Adamu received, the secret phone calls, and the lies told to the villagers about her. She was quietly building a picture of truth, one that would shatter the illusion of Adamu's power. Her children played nearby, blissfully unaware that their mother was laying the groundwork for justice. Conflict first showed itself when Adamu accused one of the servants of stealing from the compound, although Ayana knew the theft had been orchestrated to make her look careless. Her eyes flashed with quiet anger, but she said nothing, remembering her mother's words. "A pot may boil quietly before it scalds a hand that stirs it." She walked away silently, hiding both fear and fury beneath a calm surface. The tension grew more apparent when a neighbor, old Aunt Nia, approached Ayana in the early evening. "Child," she said gently, "I have seen men like your husband before. They take what they desire, believing no one watches. But the river does not forget, and neither does the earth." Ayana nodded, understanding the weight of the proverb. She knew that the eyes of the village and her own vigilance could reveal truths that wealth and pride could never conceal. That night, the moon hung low and full over Kanyemba, casting silver light on the thatched roofs. Adamu sat alone, counting coins and reviewing trade letters, while Ayana watched silently from shadows. She saw the greed in his eyes, the arrogance in his posture, and the first tremors of panic as he sensed that someone had begun to watch him. Not just anyone, but her. Suddenly, a knock came at the door. It was Mwangi, his face solemn. "Adamu, you must be careful," he whispered. "Some secrets, once revealed, cannot be hidden again, and some betrayals are more dangerous than you imagine." Adamu waved him off, trying to laugh, but the sound fell hollow in the dark compound. Outside, the children slept under mosquito nets, dreaming of simple joys, unaware of the storm that was rising in the hearts of adults. Villagers in distant huts whispered prayers, sensing that the balance of their peaceful life was about to be tested. Even the river seemed restless, its waters reflecting the tension of the night. And in the shadows, Ayana made her decision. She would not act hastily, but she would not wait either. She would watch. She would wait. And she would strike when the time was right. Her mind raced with strategies, every step measured, every word calculated. And as the moon rose high over Kanyemba, Ayana's eyes followed every move, every secret, every whisper. Little did Adamu know, the first threads of truth had already begun to unravel the life he believed untouchable, and the night was only just beginning. In every village, a whisper can travel faster than a drumbeat, and some whispers carry the weight of destiny. The sun had barely crested the horizon when the first whispers began weaving through Kanyemba village like a thin ribbon of smoke over dry grass. Women carrying baskets of yams and millet paused mid-step, leaning close to one another to share hurried words. Men at the waterhole exchanged knowing glances, and children, too young to understand the depth of conversation, repeated fragmented phrases like echoes of an unknown storm. "Have you heard about Ayana?" asked an elder woman, her eyes narrowing behind wrinkles shaped by decades of sun and wind. I saw her standing at her window all morning, staring at Adamu as though she could read his thoughts. "She is quiet, yes," another whispered, "but quiet is no sign of weakness. The river may seem calm, yet it carries stones capable of crushing even the strongest hut." From the far edge of the village, old Mbeni, the griot and respected elder, observed with a furrowed brow. He had seen countless young couples, marriages born of love or greed, falter under the weight of secrets and pride. He muttered a proverb under his breath. Even the tallest tree bends when the wind whispers its secrets. As Ayana stepped into market, balancing her basket of freshly harvested vegetables, villagers greeted her politely, but their eyes flickered with curiosity and concern. She noticed the subtle changes, the way mothers pulled their children aside, the way men straightened their shoulders before pretending casual greetings. Each glance felt like a silent question, and each smile a veiled warning. Nearby, Adamu strode with confidence, though the unease he felt in the pit of his stomach was growing. Even as he laughed loudly with his trading companions, he caught snippets of the conversations. "Have you seen how she watches him?" one woman said. "They say she knows things that even he cannot hide." The whispers were relentless, winding through the village like a serpent through tall grass, seeding doubt and fear. The younger women, sitting near the well, shared stories passed down from generations about women who had waited quietly until the moment to act, changing the fate of entire households. One of them whispered to her friend, "Do you remember the story of Mama Zuri? She watched silently for 3 years before revealing the truth, and the man who underestimated her lost everything." Ayana felt the tension prickling at the back of her neck. She knew that the village's eyes were upon her, yet she moved deliberately, maintaining a calm exterior. She greeted every passerby with gentle words, yet inside, her mind replayed every small betrayal, every lie Adamu had told, and every act of arrogance he had displayed. At the same time, Adamu's circle of friends began noticing the subtle cracks. Mwangi, always perceptive, leaned close to him during the conversation about the upcoming harvest festival. "She is no ordinary woman, Adamu. The villagers talk, and whispers have power. People notice what you do not," he said gravely. Adamu laughed dismissively, but the sound rang hollow in his own ears. He knew deep down that Mwangi was right. Ayana had always been clever, but now her presence seemed to exert influence beyond the walls of their compound. Rumors had begun, and the village, united by tradition and community, was slowly becoming a web of watchful eyes. The first confrontations of gossip came at the riverbank. 2 young men, carrying nets and talking about the morning catch, began debating whether Adamu's actions toward Ayana were justified. "He beats her for small things," one said, "and yet she keeps quiet. There is more here than we see." Meanwhile, a group of older women sat under the shade of the baobab tree, discussing the growing unease. "The elders must be told," one said firmly. "When the people speak, even the strongest man begins to tremble." Old Aunt Nia, who had been watching from her hut, nodded silently. She understood that the village was at the brink of a turning point, where gossip would either protect the innocent or expose the guilty. Ayana herself overheard fragments as she walked through the market. A small child repeated what he had heard at home. "Mama Ayana knows everything about Adamu. She sees the secrets no one tells." She smiled faintly, letting the words sink in. It was the first sign that her vigilance was beginning to ripple outward, touching even the youngest ears. That evening, the elders convened beneath the largest baobab in the village. Drums echoed softly in the distance as they sat cross-legged, the shadows of their weathered faces blending with the fading sunlight. Old Mbeni spoke first, his voice low and deliberate. When a household trembles, it is not only its walls that may fall. The winds of rumor can shake the foundations of trust, and the tree of truth may yet grow in unexpected soil. The discussion turned to Ayana and Adamu, though no names were spoken. The elders debated quietly whether intervention was necessary, or if the villagers should wait for events to unfold. Some argued for discretion, believing that too much interference might ignite a conflict. Others, more protective of the village's moral fabric, insisted that subtle observation must turn into deliberate action. That night, as the moon climbed high and bathed the village in silver light, whispers continued to travel from hut to hut. Even in sleep, Ayana's mind raced. She listened to the soft rustle of leaves outside her window, imagining every conversation that might be taking place. Her senses, honed over years of observation and life in the village, were alert to every sound. She knew that whispers could empower her or endanger her, depending on how they were handled. At the same time, Adamu lay awake, the weight of suspicion pressing heavily on him. He had underestimated the villagers' perception and, more importantly, Ayana's growing awareness. Every whisper he imagined was a reminder that control, once thought absolute, could be fragile. "What is she planning?" he muttered under his breath, the question echoing in the still night. And beyond the compound, under the dim light of lanterns, the village watched. Each whisper, each secretive glance, each hushed conversation became a thread in a tapestry of suspense and anticipation. The storm that had been quietly brewing in the hearts of Ayana and Adamu was beginning to spill over into the streets, the market, the river banks, and even into the council of elders. No one knew exactly when the balance would tip, but all felt that a moment of reckoning was approaching, like the first rumble of thunder before the downpour. And for Ayana, who had learned to see without speaking, every whispered word became a weapon and a shield, preparing her for the inevitable confrontation that would test courage, cunning, and the weight of truth. And as the village whispered under the moon's silver gaze, the unseen threads of truth wove silently through Kanyemba, binding hearts, exposing secrets, and hinting at a storm no one yet could stop. When silence is broken by the first crack of mistrust, even the strongest bonds begin to tremble. The morning light barely touched the earth when Kanyemba village awoke to a restlessness that seemed to seep into every corner. Birds perched on acacia trees fell silent, as if sensing the tension weaving through the dusty paths. In the heart of the village, Ayana's compound felt a subtle shift. Neighbors no longer exchanged simple greetings. Eyes lingered too long, whispers followed her shadow, and every gesture was scrutinized. Ayana herself felt the village's gaze like a weight pressing against her shoulders. She moved deliberately, collecting water from the river, her hand steady but her mind alert. Each ripple on the water's surface seemed to echo the murmurs that had begun at the marketplace the day before. Even the river's calm could not hide the currents of unease flowing beneath. Adamu, unaware of how deeply the village had begun to notice, strode to the main path toward the market. His steps were confident, but the confidence was brittle. As he passed groups of villagers, hushed conversations ceased, and eyes followed him, measuring and calculating. "What is she hiding?" muttered an old man under his breath. "And why does she not speak when the world would punish a lesser woman?" The tension first erupted at the central market. Ayana approached a merchant's stall, her basket heavy with yams and beans, when a group of women began murmuring about her, loud enough for others to hear. "Did you see how she looked at him yesterday?" one asked. "There's fire in those eyes, and fire is not meant for timid hearts." Another woman, younger, whispered to her friend, "They say she knows secrets even the elders do not speak of. A quiet storm is always more dangerous than a loud one." The words traveled quickly, spreading across the crowded marketplace like the smoke of a cooking fire. Meanwhile, Adamu felt a prickle of unease as his friends laughed nervously at his jokes, and their eyes darted toward Ayana. He tried to dismiss it with a false bravado, but even he could sense the slow unraveling of control. Mwangi, ever perceptive, leaned closer and said in a low voice, "Adamu, be careful. The village sees what you do not." The winds are changing. At the same moment, the younger men, who had previously debated the nature of Adamu and Ayana's relationship, began taking sides. Some defended him blindly, while others whispered that even the strongest man should not underestimate a woman who watches in silence. "There is strength in quiet observation," one said, "and Ayana has observed long enough to strike when least expected." Inside Ayana's hut, she reflected on the past weeks, on every slight, every insult, every careless act of Adamu's. She had endured so much silently, but now the whispers of the village gave her courage. She realized the eyes of the community were allies, even if unspoken, and she began to plan her next moves carefully. Tensions also rose in Adamu's household. His mother, a woman of pride and influence, noticed the subtle changes in her son's demeanor. "Why do you look so unsettled, my son?" she demanded one morning, as they prepared food together. Adamu forced a laugh, brushing it off. "It is nothing, mother. The market was busy, that is all." But she did not believe him. Mothers have eyes that pierce through facades, and she could sense the seeds of suspicion growing in the hearts of her neighbors, and perhaps even in her son. "Be careful," she warned, "for whispers can build walls that no man can climb." Outside, the children played in the dust, unaware of the adult schemes. Yet even their laughter carried fragments of overheard secrets. "Did you hear? Ayana saw him with someone else," a small boy repeated, echoing the half-truths that would soon grow into full-blown confrontations. The first crack in Adamu's confidence appeared during the village gathering near the old baobab. Elders had summoned a meeting to discuss community matters, and inevitably, the tension between Ayana and Adamu surfaced. Though names were not spoken, the entire gathering sensed the underlying storm. Every rustle of cloth, every shift of weight on the dry ground, seemed amplified in the heavy silence. Ayana approached the gathering, balancing a small bundle of herbs for the healer. Her gaze met Adamu's briefly, and though neither spoke, the air between them was charged with unspoken truths. She had watched long enough to understand the man fully, his pride, his jealousy, and his arrogance. The whispers of the village were now echoing within her heart, guiding her toward the moment when silence would transform into action. Adamu, on the other hand, felt the weight of eyes following his every movement. He had always believed that power lay in visibility, loud declarations, controlled wealth, and the dominance of presence. Yet now, the subtle movement of Ayana and the shifting loyalties of the villagers suggested a different form of power, one he had underestimated. The quiet influence of observation, patience, and understanding. As the day wore on, tension turned to confrontation. In the central market, a small disagreement over a basket of yams escalated into a heated argument. One villager, emboldened by the whispers, accused another of spreading falsehoods about a household in the village. The argument drew a crowd, and the drama became impossible to ignore. Ayana stood nearby, her calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the rising anger around her. She knew that every action, every word, and every glance could shape the outcome. As night fell, the village seemed to hold its breath. Lamps flickered in the huts, casting long shadows over dirt paths. The elders met once more, discussing in hushed tones the rising tensions. Old Mbeni's voice broke the silence. "When the wind carries whispers, it is not the words that strike hardest, but the weight they bear in hearts unprepared for truth." That night, Ayana sat by her window, looking out over the sleeping village. She understood now that the murmurs and whispers were more than just idle talk. They were a signal that change was near. She had endured silence, she had observed, and she had waited. The storm was approaching, and she could feel its first gusts brushing against her face, whispering promises of revelation, justice, and reckoning. Even in her solitude, Ayana sensed that the village itself was alive with anticipation. Every hut, every lantern, and every figure in the shadows seemed to pulse with attention that would soon demand answers. And somewhere in the darkness, Adamu, unaware of the depth of her awareness, was about to discover that the calm before a storm is often the most dangerous moment of all. And so, under the eyes of the village, the threads of pride, jealousy, and whispered truths wove together, ready to snap at the slightest touch, setting the stage for a confrontation that no one could yet imagine. In a village where every tradition carries weight, even silence can become a crime. The sun rose slowly over Kanyemba village, casting long golden beams to the thatched roofs and drying the dew on the dusty paths. The marketplace, once bustling with carefree chatter, now carried the weight of unspoken tension. Whispers and sideways glances followed Ayana wherever she went, and it seemed that even the songs of the market drummers were laden with caution. Ayana moved with purpose, balancing a basket of fresh yams and a small bundle of healing herbs. She was aware of the rising tide of judgment in the village, a tide that could crush even the strongest hearts if one did not swim carefully. Tradition in Kanyemba was not merely custom, it was law, and the elders were its unyielding enforcers. That morning, an unusual gathering was held near the old baobab tree, a site that had long been used for council meetings and rituals. The elders, dressed in ceremonial robes dyed with earth tones and ochre, spoke quietly among themselves, their faces grave. Old Mbeni, the wisest of them all, addressed the assembly. When the balance of respect and tradition is disturbed, it is not merely the offender who suffers, but the entire village. We must consider carefully. Ayana's heart sank as she approached the gathering. She understood that the elders' attention had shifted toward her household, not for any wrong she had committed, but because the villagers could sense her silent defiance. Their cultural expectations were heavy, insisting that a woman remain obedient, quiet, and subservient to her husband. Every deviation was noted, whispered about, and judged. As she settled near the fringe of the gathering, whispers escalated. "She spends too much time observing," said one villager. "A woman who sees too much forgets her place." Another countered, "Perhaps it is not observation, but wisdom. Yet wisdom is dangerous when cloaked in silence." Adamu, unaware of the depths of Ayana's resilience, felt the pressure mounting around him. Even his closest friends began to question his authority. Mwangi, who had once been loyal, whispered, "Adamu, the elders' eyes are upon you. You must remember the ways of our people. A husband's role is clear, but pride has its limits." Ayana's younger cousin, Lela, approached her cautiously. "Annie Ayana, do not ignore what the elders say. They watch, and if you do not align with their expectations, they may decide on actions you cannot prevent." Ayana nodded slowly, understanding that in Kanyemba, culture was a sword and shield, protective yet sharp enough to wound the careless. The elders called for a ceremony to reaffirm the village's respect for tradition. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense and the sound of drums. Children sat cross-legged at the edges of the gathering, watching with wide eyes as adults moved with careful choreography. Women hummed prayers under their breaths, while men adjusted their robes, feeling the weight of responsibility. During the ceremony, a series of questions were posed by the elders, carefully designed to test adherence to customs. Ayana felt each question like a spear, aiming not at truth but at conformity. "Who ensures that the household obeys the sacred rules?" one elder asked. Another added, "How does one balance personal desire with communal responsibility?" Ayana responded with poise, her words measured yet honest. "I respect the traditions of our village," she said. "Yet I also believe that understanding and observation allow us to honor these customs more fully. Compliance without thought may satisfy the eye but not the heart." Her voice carried over the crowd, confident and unwavering. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Some admired her courage, while others muttered that she was challenging the natural order. Adamu's face flushed with anger and unease. For the first time, he felt that the cultural weight he relied on to assert dominance was tilting against him. Even the elders exchanged uncertain glances, sensing that Ayana's words were more than mere defiance. They were a quiet rebellion, and rebellion in Kanyemba demanded attention. The village healer, Mama Kesai, approached the elders and whispered something inaudible. Old Mbeni nodded solemnly, then addressed the gathering. "In our customs, every imbalance must be rectified. Yet, wisdom may guide us toward a solution that honors both tradition and fairness. We will watch, but be warned, eyes never close in Kanyemba." That night, the village hummed with tension. Fires crackled in the communal squares, and the scent of roasted maize mingled with the earthy aroma of wet clay huts. Ayana sat by her small hearth, reflecting on the day's events. The drums, once rhythmic and cheerful, now seemed to echo the unease in her heart. She knew that the cultural pressure was not merely external. It was internal, too. Every whisper, every sidelong glance weighed on her spirit. Even the youngest children, playing in the dust, seemed aware of the invisible threads of judgment weaving through their community. "Auntie Ayana, why do they look at you that way?" asked Lella softly. Ayana smiled faintly. "Because, little one, they sense that truth is growing, and the seeds of change often frighten those who cling to old ways." Adamu, meanwhile, paced restlessly in his compound. His pride, once unshakable, now quivered under the scrutiny of elders, villagers, and even his own conscience. He remembered Mwangi's warning and the subtle defiance in Ayana's eyes. His household, once a symbol of dominance, now felt like a stage where every misstep could ignite a public scandal. The first formal challenge of the elders was scheduled for the next day, a private audience where the couple would be questioned about their household practices and adherence to customs. The village waited in anticipation, gossip simmering like coals beneath a thin layer of ash. No one doubted that Ayana's silent strength and Adamu's fragile pride would collide under the weight of cultural expectation. As the night deepened, Ayana whispered to herself, her voice barely above the crackling fire. "The village may judge, the elders may question, and the customs may bind us, but silence is my weapon and patience is my shield." Outside, the wind stirred the dry leaves, carried with it the whispers of the villagers, the soft cries of the children, and the distant drum beats that marked time in Kanyemba. The cultural pressure had reached its peak, and the village seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for the storm that no one could yet name. And so, with the eyes of tradition upon them, the threads of pride, defiance, and whispered judgment were pulled taut, ready to snap, leaving secrets and hearts exposed to the fire of the village's scrutiny. In every village, beneath the smiles and routines, there are secrets waiting to shatter lives. The dawn was pale and hesitant as Ayana stepped out of her modest hut. The morning mist curled around the edges of the village, weaving between the huts and stretching into the fields where the farmers were already tending their crops. Today was unlike any other. A tension lingered in the air, dense and unyielding, as if the wind itself carried warnings. Ayana's mind was restless. The events of the last days had stirred something in her soul, a quiet resolve that she could not yet name. Her family, close friends, and even her children seemed to sense the same unease. From the distant hills came the rhythmic beat of drums, signaling that a gathering would soon occur, though the purpose remained unknown to most. She approached the village square, where the elders had summoned a small assembly. It was not a formal council, not yet, but the presence of old Mbeni Mama Kesai and the other respected leaders created an atmosphere thick with unspoken expectation. Their eyes, usually soft with age and wisdom, now glimmered with a mix of concern and determination. Adamu arrived moments later, his expression taut, eyes darting between the elders and Ayana. Pride and fear waged a quiet battle within him. He whispered to his friend Mwangi, who lingered at his side, "Do you think they suspect anything?" Mwangi hesitated, the weight of truth heavy on his tongue. "Perhaps," he admitted softly, "but some truths are more dangerous when hidden than when revealed." The elders began their discourse, speaking in measured tones, referencing village laws and customs. But their words held double meanings, subtle hints that something beyond ordinary observation had disturbed the balance. Ayana listened intently, her senses sharpened by both fear and curiosity. Then it happened. The village scribe, a young man named Te who had recently returned from the city, approached Ayana cautiously, carrying a small bundle wrapped in bark cloth. "Auntie Ayana," he whispered, glancing around to ensure no one overheard, "I found this among the records left in the old council hall. You must see it before anyone else does." Ayana's hands trembled slightly as she took the bundle. She untied the bark and unfolded what seemed to be a series of old, yellowed papers, documents she had never known existed. Names, dates, and deeds were written in precise calligraphy, but one particular entry drew her attention. It revealed that her late father had secretly left a portion of his inheritance in a hidden trust. The sum was staggering, enough to change the course of not only her life, but the power dynamics of the entire village. Ayana's eyes widened as she scanned the details. The documents also mentioned a family secret. Certain properties and businesses that she had always believed belonged to others were, in truth, legally hers. Adamu, unaware of the discovery, spoke loudly to the elders. Surely there must be reason for these meetings, but I assure you, my household follows the village ways diligently. His voice was confident, yet a flicker of unease betrayed him. Ayana's cousin Lella peeked from behind a tree, noticing the documents. "Andy, what do they say?" she asked softly. Ayana's voice was quiet, almost reverent, as she answered. "It appears that my father's legacy is far greater than we ever imagined. There is a truth here that no one in the village has seen, perhaps for good reason." The elders exchanged glances. Benny's brow furrowed as he addressed Ayana directly. "Child, do you understand the weight of what you hold? In our village, wealth and property are not mere possessions. They are responsibility, and secrets of this nature can either heal or destroy." Ayana nodded solemnly. "I understand, Elder Benny. Yet knowledge cannot remain hidden forever. It will find a way to reveal itself, whether gently or by force." Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the marketplace. A villager named Juma, known for his sharp tongue and curiosity, had caught sight of Ayana holding the bundle. He whispered loudly to others, "Look, Ayana carries something from the council hall. What secrets does she hide?" Within moments, a crowd had gathered, murmurs rippling through the air like wildfire. Adamu's heart sank as he realized the attention. "What is she doing? Why is everyone staring?" he muttered. He tried to approach Ayana, but Benny raised a hand, signaling him to stay. "Patience, Adamu," the elder warned. "Some truths are best discovered, not forced." Ayana felt the weight of countless eyes upon her. She knew that if the documents became public prematurely, chaos would follow. Yet the pull of justice and revelation was stronger than fear. She took a deep breath and approached the elders. "I wish to understand fully what my father intended," she said. "These papers indicate matters that affect many, and I believe guidance is needed to navigate them." Mama Kasai stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Child, the revelations you have uncovered are not only about wealth, but about power, morality, and the balance of our community. You must decide wisely, for each step will ripple far beyond your household." The villagers pressed closer, their murmurs growing louder. Some looked on with envy, others with admiration, and a few with open suspicion. Adamu's pride bristled, but fear now mingled with it. How could this be?" he stammered. "All this time she knew nothing?" Ayana lowered her gaze respectfully, but spoke with quiet authority. "Perhaps none of us knew. Perhaps some truths were always meant to remain unseen until the right moment. But moments like these decide destinies." The elders nodded in solemn agreement, understanding that a turning point had arrived. Even the youngest children paused in their games, sensing the gravity of what had been uncovered. In Kanyemba, knowledge was power, and secrets, once revealed, were forces not easily contained. Ayana's mind raced as she considered her next steps. She could share the documents, confront Adamu, or seek counsel from trusted allies. Each choice carried risk. Yet one thing was clear. Her life, the lives of her children, and the entire village would never be the same. As the sun reached its zenith, the hum of the village deepened. Drum beats echoed through the hills, a rhythm that seemed to underscore the tension building among the people. Ayana clutched the bundle tightly, knowing that the hidden truth in her hands could either mend broken hearts or shatter them completely. Adamu, sensing that something monumental was unfolding, tried to regain control. "Ayana, what is this?" he demanded. But Ayana did not answer immediately. Instead, she allowed the silence to stretch, letting the weight of anticipation and fear settle upon him. Lella, watching from the edge of the crowd, whispered, "Annie, the villagers will not wait long. They need to know." Ayana's lips curved into a faint, deliberate smile. "Let them wait," she said softly. Patience often reveals more than haste ever could. Even as the villagers' curiosity reached its peak, the elders whispered among themselves, aware that a storm was about to erupt. This discovery, hidden for decades, had the potential to expose greed, betrayal, and lies that had festered quietly beneath the village's surface. And so, a hidden truth emerged, a revelation that could topple pride, unmask betrayal, and force the village to confront the secrets it had long ignored. When secrets rise to the surface, It is the elders who must weigh them against the balance of the village. The heat of the midday sun had settled over Kanyemba, its golden rays dancing over the rooftops and dusty pathways. Ayana still held the bundle of her father's secrets, her hand steady but her heart racing. The village square had transformed into a tense theater. Villagers gathered in tight clusters, whispering feverishly as rumors of her discovery swirled like the smoke from the morning fires. Old Benny, his back stooped but presence commanding, raised a staff to silence the murmuring crowd. The drums of the village seemed to pause, leaving only the soft sighs of the wind as it slipped between the trees. Mama Kasai, standing beside him, looked at Ayana with eyes both kind and piercing, as if she could see into the very depths of her soul. "The matter at hand," old Benny began, his voice low yet echoing across the square, "is not just about a family's inheritance, nor the wealth hidden from view. It is about the integrity of Kanyemba, about the bonds that hold our village together." Adamu shifted uncomfortably. His pride, what had long shielded him from shame, now cracked under the weight of scrutiny. "Elders," he said, his tone tight, "I assure you, our household has followed every custom, every law. Nothing here has been hidden intentionally. Ayana's findings are a surprise to all of us." Ayana met his gaze, steady and unyielding. "Adamu," she said softly, "I never sought power or revenge. I sought only truth. And truth has a way of finding its way to those who would otherwise ignore it." Mama Kasai raised a hand, her silver bangles catching the sunlight. "Child, your words carry weight. Yet the village must hear every part of this story before judgment can be made. Secrets buried for decades affect more than a single family. They ripple across fields, markets, and homes. The council will examine these papers carefully." At her side, Tay, the young scribe, stepped forward with trembling hands. He laid the bundle before the elders, letting the delicate papers fall open like a river revealing its hidden depths. The elders bent close, scrutinizing every line, every signature. Old Benny's eyes narrowed as he muttered proverbs under his breath, a rhythm of wisdom and caution. He who hides the river's path from the villagers cannot escape the flood. The crowd held its breath, sensing that the elders' deliberation was more than formality. It was the beginning of reckoning. Some villagers whispered encouragement to Ayana, while others muttered discontent at the thought of upheaval. Adamu's friends murmured nervously, aware that the balance of influence was shifting before their very eyes. After what seemed an eternity, old Benny spoke again. "Ayana," he said, voice resonant, "your father's intentions were not careless. These documents reveal not just wealth, but responsibility, the stewardship of lands, properties, and businesses that many acclaimed as their own. It is a heavy burden, but one that cannot be ignored." He turned to the assembly. "All who are here today must understand. The village thrives on justice and truth. Any attempt to conceal or manipulate this inheritance will bring consequences not just to families, but to the harmony of Kanyemba itself." Adamu's face reddened with anger and fear. "Elders," he said sharply, "surely you see this is chaos. Ayana's discovery threatens nothing but the normal order of life. Must we unravel everything because of old papers?" Mama Kasai's voice cut through the tension like a spear. "Normal order?" she echoed. "Do you call deception and concealment the normal order? We are not here to protect pride at the cost of justice. We are here to protect truth, even if it unsettles the hearts of those unprepared to face it." Ayana felt a ripple of relief at the elders' defense, yet she knew the council's judgment would not come lightly. Old Benny motioned for her to step forward, signaling that she would have the opportunity to explain everything in her own words. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice carrying across the square. "Elders, respected council, the papers I hold are not merely about inheritance. They reveal that some who wield influence in the village, people I trusted, people who raised me, may have acted in ways that violated not only trust but the customs that bind us. My father's intention was to ensure that all families live with fairness, that no one gains unjustly at another's expense." Murmurs surged through the crowd like wind through the acacia trees. Some villagers nodded in understanding. Others shook their heads, struggling to reconcile the revelations with long-held assumptions. Old Benny's voice rose, commanding silence. "Before judgment, every party must speak. Ayana," you have revealed the hidden truth. Adamu, you have lived unaware of this legacy, yet you must now account for your actions in light of it. We will convene tomorrow at the council hall to examine these matters thoroughly. No one is to leave, no document is to be hidden, and no word is to be spoken beyond this square until the council meets. Adamu's jaw tightened. His eyes darted to Ayana, then to the elders, then to the gathering villagers. This is unfair, he whispered, almost to himself. I followed the rules. I thought I did. Ayana's voice was calm, almost sorrowful. Unfairness is often revealed when truth shines its light. What was once hidden now demands reckoning. Even as the crowd dispersed slightly, tension hung heavy in the air. Villagers whispered in clusters, speculating about the fate of the family, the implications of the inheritance, and the balance of power in the village. The marketplace, usually filled with laughter and bargaining, seemed eerily quiet, as though the land itself held its breath. At the edge of the square, Lela tugged at Ayana's sleeve. "Auntie, what will happen now?" she asked wide-eyed. Ayana looked down at her niece, her gaze steady and determined. "Now, child," she said, "we prepare for the elders' guidance. Their wisdom will weigh every action. But we must be ready. Once the council begins, there will be no turning back." "Tay," who had remained close to the elders, whispered Ayana. "They will probe every detail, every signature, every hidden clause. You must be truthful in every answer, or the consequences could be severe." Ayana nodded silently. She felt the immense weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Her father's trust, the integrity of the village, and the fragile balance of relationships were all now resting on the careful navigation of the council's scrutiny. Adamu, standing amidst the remaining villagers, clenched his fists. Pride and fear battled within him, each heartbeat heavy with anticipation. He could sense the inevitability of the elders' intervention. There would be no shortcuts, no whispered deals in the shadows. Everything was about to be exposed. Ayana, sensing the first tremors of change, looked around the square. She saw villagers whispering, eyes wide with curiosity and concern. She saw children pause in their play, sensing the gravity of the moment, and she felt a quiet strength, rooted in knowledge and the guidance of those elders whose wisdom had been cultivated over decades. And so, the elders stepped into the fray, their judgment poised to weigh truth against pride and justice against deception. Tomorrow, the village would hold its breath, for the council's decision would ripple through every heart and home. In the heart of the village, truth must face the light, and when it does, no secret can remain hidden. The sun rose with a golden hue over Kanyemba, spilling warmth onto the clay rooftops and winding paths that crisscrossed the village. Today was different. The marketplace, usually bustling with vendors and children darting between stalls, was unusually quiet. The villagers knew something monumental was about to occur. Rumors had traveled fast. The elders would convene, and the truth about Ayana's discovery would be revealed. Ayana arrived at the village council hall, a structure of polished timber and carved symbols of ancestral spirits. The air was heavy with anticipation, the faint scent of burning sage mingling with the earthy aroma of freshly tilled soil. Villagers gathered in concentric circles around the hall, murmuring, eyes wide with curiosity and dread. Old Mbeni's staff struck the ground 3 times, a signal of authority that immediately drew silence. Mama Kesai stepped beside him, her silver bangles jingling softly, a melodic reminder of her presence. "Today," she said, voice carrying across the crowd, "truth will be spoken and justice must follow. Let all who have ears listen, for the balance of Kanyemba is at stake." Adamu's posture was rigid, his pride and fear warring for control. He had spent sleepless nights pondering every possible defense, every way to protect himself from exposure. Yet now, confronted with the collective gaze of the village and the piercing eyes of the elders, he felt the first tremors of vulnerability. Ayana stepped forward, holding the bundle of documents close to her chest. She could hear the whispers ripple like wind through the branches of the baobab trees surrounding the council hall. "Elders, respected villagers," she began, her voice steady. "These papers contain truths that have been hidden too long. They reveal actions that have affected not just one family, but many lives in our community. Old Mbeni motioned for silence, and Ayana continued. I have sought neither revenge nor recognition. My aim is to restore balance and justice. For too long, deceit and concealment have passed unnoticed, while those with power acted unchecked. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some villagers nodded in agreement. Others crossed their arms, skeptical of the young woman who dared confront tradition and authority. Adamu took a deep breath and stepped forward. His voice, though quivering slightly, carried the weight of authority he had always relied upon. Elders, villagers, I have done what I believe was right. If mistakes were made, they were not intentional. Ayana's claims, though presented as truth, are exaggerated. My household has always respected tradition and community. Mama Kesai's eyes narrowed, her gaze piercing like a hawk observing its prey. Intentions, she said, her voice calm but sharp, cannot mask consequences of one's actions. Ayana's words are supported by documents that bear witness to what has been done. We do not judge only intentions here. We judge deeds and their impact on the village and its people. The crowd shifted uneasily. Adamu's closest allies, who had once stood confidently by his side, now exchanged glances, uncertainty creeping into their expressions. The weight of the elder's presence was undeniable. Ayana took a step closer to the council, spreading the documents carefully before them. These papers, she said, voice rising, reveal mismanaged lands, diverted resources, and the concealment of wealth that could have benefited the community. Every family has a right to know what has been done in the shadows of power. A gasp rippled through the villagers as they glimpsed the documents. Names, numbers, and transactions filled the pages, each revelation stirring anger, disbelief, and curiosity. Old Mbeni raised a hand, commanding attention. Adamu, you have heard the truth as presented. What do you say to these revelations? Will you deny them, or will you account for your actions? Adamu's face turned crimson. He glanced at Ayana, whose gaze was unwavering, then to the elders, and finally at the villagers who had come to witness this reckoning. I will not deny the documents, he admitted, his voice tight with suppressed frustration. But I have always acted in what I believe to be the village's best interest. I did not seek personal gain, though perhaps my judgment was clouded. Mama Kesai's gaze softened, though her voice remained firm. Acknowledgement is the first step toward justice, Adamu. But acknowledgement alone does not repair the harm done. Today, in this public gathering, we seek not only truth but accountability. One of the villagers, an elder woman named Nia, stepped forward. Her hands were lined with age, yet her posture carried the dignity of years steeped in wisdom. Adamu, she said, voice clear, we have lived with the consequences of actions we could not see. Families have suffered, resources have been misused, and trust has been broken. The community demands that these matters be addressed openly, not behind closed doors. Another villager, a young man named Kojo, shouted from the back of the hall. And what of those who profited from this secrecy? Will they answer as well? The murmurs intensified, and Adamu felt the weight of the villagers' eyes like a physical force pressing upon him. He could no longer rely solely on his words. The truth of the documents, combined with the scrutiny of the elders, rendered any deception futile. Ayana's voice rang out again, calm but firm. This confrontation is necessary not to shame, but to restore balance. The village thrives when its people act with honesty, integrity, and respect for one another. We cannot let pride or fear dictate our actions any longer. Old Mbeni's staff tapped the ground, drawing silence once more. Today, all secrets shall be brought into the open. Every family, every action that has caused harm or injustice must be examined. Adamu, you and your household are not beyond accountability. Ayana, you have done what is right by bringing the truth forward. Adamu's shoulders slumped slightly, the veneer of control he had maintained for so long beginning to crumble. He realized that the public confrontation was more than a formality. It was a reckoning. Every word, every gesture, every past decision will be scrutinized not only by the elders, but by every villager present. The council then opened the floor for testimony. Witnesses stepped forward, recounting instances of mismanagement, concealment, and favoritism. Some voices trembled with fear, others with anger, and a few with sorrow. The collective impact of these revelations painted a vivid picture of a household whose influence had been wielded recklessly. Adamu attempted to respond, defending his decisions, explaining his intentions, and highlighting shifting before his eyes. Ayana watched, her heart heavy but resolute. She understood the importance of this public confrontation. It was not enough to present the truth privately. The village needed to witness the accountability demanded by their culture, their traditions, and their collective moral compass. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the council hall, tension reached its peak. The villagers leaned forward, their eyes fixed on the unfolding drama, sensing that the outcome would forever alter the social fabric of Kanyemba. And so, the veil of secrecy was lifted, exposing actions and intentions alike. In the core of the village, pride and deception faced alight, and the hearts of all present would never be the same. When the walls of deceit crumble, chaos follows, and no heart remains untouched. The sun had descended beyond the horizon, painting Kanyemba in a dusky orange glow, as if the village itself sensed a storm about to erupt. The council hall, usually a place of calm deliberation, had transformed into a crucible of emotions. Adamu's defenses had weakened under the weight of testimonies, and whispers of betrayal surged through the villagers like a wild wind. Ayana, standing firm, felt the tension coil in the air, palpable and suffocating. Her hands still clutched the documents, evidence of truths that had been long buried. The elders, once pillars of order, now exchanged uneasy glances. Even old Mbeni's steady gaze flickered with concern, sensing that the village had reached a tipping point. Adamu's closest allies shuffled uncomfortably, their loyalty wavering under the unrelenting scrutiny. Murmurs rippled like waves across the crowd. Some villagers shook their heads in disbelief. Others pressed their fists together in anger, and a few quietly wept at the injustices they had endured in silence. Breaking the tense quiet, Kojo, the young man who had previously spoken out, stepped forward with a voice trembling from suppressed rage. How can one man, one household, hold so much power over so many lives and twist it for personal gain? His eyes blazed with intensity, reflecting the shared frustrations of the villagers. We trusted you, Adamu, and yet behind closed doors you built walls of greed and pride. Adamu's face tightened, beads of sweat forming along his forehead. He opened his mouth, perhaps to defend himself, but the collective weight of accusations froze him. The council hall felt smaller, oppressive. Every eye a silent judge, every whisper a dagger. Mama Keisai stepped forward, her voice firm and resonant, cutting through the tension like a sharpened spear. Adamu, you have brought this upon yourself. The villagers have spoken, and their voices carry the wisdom of generations. No man, no matter his wealth or standing, can rise above the laws of morality and the gaze of the community. The villagers erupted in a mixture of murmurs and shouts. Some demanded immediate restitution, while others called for punishment. The cacophony reflected the chaos now gripping Kanyemba, a community long patient with injustice now unrestrained in its demand for accountability. Adamu's palms were slick with sweat, and his pride, once unyielding, now cracked under the mounting pressure. You do not understand, he finally shouted, his voice raw. Everything I did was for the family, for the village. But the words fell flat, drowned by the chorus of dissenting voices. Ayana's voice rose, clear and commanding, cutting through the chaos. Family? Village? Where was that care when secrets were kept, when resources were diverted, when trust was shattered? The people here know the truth, and it is not mercy they seek, they demand justice. A sudden commotion erupted near the back of the hall. A group of villagers, unable to contain their fury, began shouting and gesturing wildly, pointing toward the documents and Ayana. The air felt electric with anger and anticipation. Old Mbeni's staff struck the floor thrice, attempting to restore order, but the unrest only intensified. From the shadows, Nia, the elder woman who had spoken previously, stepped forward. Her voice, though calm, carried authority that momentarily hushed the crowd. Chaos without direction achieves nothing, she said. But let the breaking point remind us that injustice cannot be ignored. Actions have consequences, and now, Adamu, you face the consequences of your choices. Adamu's legs wobbled. For the first time, He felt fear penetrate his carefully constructed armor of arrogance. Every whisper, every accusation, every testimony now pressed upon him like the weight of a storm. The villagers' collective gaze bore into him, 1,000 eyes reflecting the culmination of years of neglect, deceit, and betrayal. Then came the most devastating revelation. One of Adamu's own advisors, a man named Kofi who had managed the household accounts, stepped forward with trembling hands, clutching additional evidence. "I cannot remain silent any longer," he confessed, his voice cracking. "These documents, they show transactions you attempted to hide, even from your family. The wealth that should have supported the village was diverted. I was too afraid to speak before, but now the truth must be known." Gasps echoed through the hall. Villagers leaned forward, their expressions a mix of shock, vindication, and fury. The evidence corroborated Ayana's claims in a manner so undeniable that even the most loyal allies of Adamu began to look away, shame creeping into their eyes. Adamu's voice shook as he addressed the council. I never intended harm. Everything I did was to protect our legacy." But his words were hollow, unable to outweigh the mounting proof of betrayal. Ayana's gaze remained unflinching. "Protection does not justify oppression," she said. "Power misused is no different from theft, and fear masquerading as authority is still tyranny." The hall's atmosphere grew more volatile. Some villagers shouted accusations. Others demanded restitution for the wrong suffered. A few elders tried to mediate, but the emotional torrent could not be calmed. The chaos was complete, a reflection of the village's collective heartbreak and rage. Amidst the uproar, a sudden, unexpected sound silenced the room, a drumbeat from the village square, long used to signal emergencies or summons. The rhythm was deep, resonant, commanding attention. Slowly, the crowd turned their heads toward the open doors of the hall. Villagers outside, hearing the commotion, had gathered in anticipation, their own shouts and cries adding to the pandemonium. Old Mbeni lifted his staff, raising it above his head, signaling for order. "Let this drumbeat remind us," he intoned, "that chaos is born of truth, but order is born of justice. We must act, not react. We must guide our anger toward righteousness, lest it consume the village itself." The drumbeat continued, echoing to the village like a heartbeat, steady and unyielding. Adamu, realizing that the entire community now knew the truth, felt a deep, sinking despair. His pride had fractured, his power diminished, and the faces of villagers he had once considered beneath him now reflected judgment, disappointment, and the weight of betrayal. Ayana's voice rose above the tension, calm yet commanding. "We stand at a breaking point," she said. "But let this breaking be a cleansing, a turning point where deceit ends, where transparency begins, and where the village may heal." At that moment, a young child, no more than 8, stepped forward. His small voice, quivering but clear, pierced the heavy air. "Why did you hide the truth from us?" he asked Adamu. "We trusted you to protect the village, not use it for yourself." The crowd fell silent at the child's words. Their simplicity cut through the chaos, highlighting the innocence that had suffered amidst deception. Adamu lowered his gaze, the realization of his failures crashing down upon him like the torrential rains of the rainy season. Old Mbeni spoke once more, his voice steady and solemn. "Chaos has revealed what secrecy could not. Tension. In the heart of Kanyemba, chaos revealed the depths of deceit. Every secret, every hidden act had surfaced, leaving the village forever changed, and the journey toward justice was only just beginning. When chaos subsides, the heart retreats to its solitude, seeking answers in the silence of reflection." The night had fallen over Kanyemba, casting long shadows across the village paths and the mud-brick houses that had witnessed generations of joy, sorrow, and struggle. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wet earth from the afternoon rain. Fires flickered in the communal hearths, their orange glow casting dancing shapes upon the walls, shadows that seemed to whisper of past deeds and hidden truths. In the quiet that followed the chaos of the council hall, Ayana walked alone along the riverbank, her heart heavy but resolute. Her mind replayed the events of the day, Adamu's arrogance, the villagers' rage, the shocking revelations that had surfaced. Each step she took felt deliberate, a measured rhythm against the soft hum of cicadas in the surrounding forest. She reflected on her own choices, the path that had led her to confront deceit and injustice, and the weight of responsibility that now rested upon her shoulders. Ayana paused at the edge of the water, staring at her reflection, rippled by the gentle currents. "Is justice truly served by exposing truth?" she whispered, her voice mingling with the rustle of leaves. "Or does it simply replace one pain with another?" She clenched her fists, feeling the tension of anger, sorrow, and hope intertwine. She knew the villagers had seen the truth, but at what cost to their hearts? To their sense of unity? Meanwhile, in his compound on the hill, Adamu sat in solitude. The once proud man now seemed diminished, dwarfed by the enormity of his failures. His luxurious home, filled with treasures and wealth, felt hollow, echoing with the voices of those he had betrayed. He stared at the intricately carved wooden mask on his wall, a symbol of protection and wisdom. But tonight, it offered no comfort. Adamu's mind was a tempest. "I thought power and control would safeguard my family, my village, my legacy," he muttered, voice cracking. "But I see now that wealth without integrity is nothing. I have failed, not only myself, but everyone I claim to protect." The words tasted bitter, and for the first time in his life, fear replaced pride. He rose and walked the balcony, staring at the village below. The flickering fires of the hearths mirrored the unrest he had caused, a sea of lights representing countless hearts scarred by his actions. His advisors, once loyal, had turned away, their expressions reflecting disappointment and disillusionment. The walls of his home no longer shielded him. They mirrored the walls he had built in his own conscience, now crumbling piece by piece. At the river, Ayana noticed figures moving in the distance, elderly women carrying lanterns, young men and children whispering in groups, their eyes reflecting concern and curiosity. The village was alive, even in the aftermath of chaos, and each life there was a reminder of the delicate balance between justice and empathy. She understood now that exile was not merely physical. It was emotional, a retreat into oneself to reckon with deeds and decisions. Adamu sank to the floor of his private chamber, resting his head against the carved wooden doors. Memories of the past, moments of kindness squandered, laughter replaced with deception, flooded his mind. He thought of Ayana's courage, her unwavering stance in the face of his pride. For the first time, he acknowledged the enormity of his mistakes, the lives disrupted, the trust broken. "I must find a way to make amends," he whispered into the darkness, though unsure the path was open or even possible. Ayana continued along the riverbank, reaching the ancient baobab tree at the edge of the water. Its massive roots twisted like the stories of generations past, and its broad canopy seemed to shelter her from the weight of the world. She knelt, touching the damp earth, and reflected on her journey. "Even in betrayal, there is a lesson," she murmured. "Even in anger, there is growth. And even in sorrow, there is a seed of hope." Nearby, the elders had convened quietly, away from the prying eyes of the villagers. Ombeni, holding his staff, spoke softly but firmly. "Exile is not merely banishment from place, but from the self. Adamu must face his heart, as must all who bring harm, for only in reflection can true change be born." Mama Kasai nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "The breaking point has shown the fractures, but now the time of introspection begins. Only through it can the village heal, and the wrongs be truly acknowledged." Adamu's thoughts returned to the faces of the villagers, the young children who had trusted him, the elders who had guided him, the mothers and fathers who had believed in the promise of community. Each memory pierced him with remorse. He realized that wealth had blinded him to the essence of leadership, empathy, fairness, and respect. He whispered prayers into the night, seeking guidance and courage to confront not only the villagers but himself. Ayana, sensing the depth of her own journey, allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not of sorrow alone, but catharsis. She had faced deception, stood firm against injustice, and now understood that true strength lay not in retaliation, but in reflection, in the ability to learn and grow from pain. Suddenly, the sound of the night shifted. A distant drumbeat, soft but steady, called from the village square. It was a reminder of life continuing, of the community observing, learning, and adapting. The drumbeat echoed like a heartbeat, urging patience, resilience, and the slow march toward restoration. Ayana rose, her resolve strengthened. She would guide, witness, and support, but the journey of redemption would require more than courage. It would demand wisdom, patience, and humility. Adamu, still in solitude, resolved that the next steps of his journey would be undertaken with sincerity. He would face the village, seek forgiveness, and confront the consequences of his actions. But more importantly, he would confront himself, the arrogance, the pride, and the neglect that had led him to this moment. As dawn approached, the village slowly awakened, unaware of profound internal transformations unfolding among its key players. Ayana returned home, her steps lightened with purpose. Adamu, still in his chamber, prepared to the coming reckoning, the weight of introspection guiding every thought. The chaos of yesterday had given way to quiet reflection, yet the tension of anticipation lingered in the air, signaling that the next phase of justice and redemption was about to begin. In the stillness of exile, both heart and soul are tested. Reflection teaches humility, remorse fosters courage, and in the quiet moments of reckoning, the seeds of redemption are planted. Even the darkest nights give way to dawn, and the heart that reflects finds a path to redemption. The morning sun rose over Kanyemba, casting its warm golden glow across the village. The mist that clung to the river had begun to lift, revealing the humble mud huts, the bustling market stalls, and the open spaces where children played with carefree laughter. Yet amidst this familiar scene, there was a quiet tension. News of the previous night's revelations and chaos had spread through the village, carried by the soft whispers of mothers, the hurried footsteps of young men, and the concerned glances of elders. Ayana woke early, her mind focused on the days ahead. She understood that justice, though often painful, required balance, fairness, and courage. She prepared herself to guide the villagers and confront Adamu, not with vengeance, but with the wisdom and strength that only experience and patience could provide. She dressed in her modest attire, a flowing chiton that spoke of both humility and dignity, and walked toward the village square where the elders were gathering. The elders had already begun assembling, their staffs tapping rhythmically on the ground as they moved. Old Mbeni's eyes, sharp yet weary, scanned the faces of those gathered. Mama Kesai whispered to him, "The villagers need more than anger. They need direction, a path to reconcile what has been done." Mbeni nodded solemnly. Redemption is not given, it is earned, and the journey begins with truth and courage. Meanwhile, Adamu sat in his private chamber, staring at the carved wooden masks lining his walls. Each mask seemed to watch him, reminding him of the values he had neglected. He rose slowly, the weight of guilt pressing heavily upon his shoulders. He knew that the first step toward redemption was not grand gestures, but honest acknowledgement of his failings. He donned simple robes, leaving behind the symbols of power that had only served to isolate him, and prepared to face the village. The villagers gathered in the square, murmuring among themselves. Mothers clutched their children, elders held their staffs tightly, and young men exchanged nervous glances. The air was thick with anticipation. Ayana stood at the center, her presence commanding attention. She raised her hand for silence, and the village fell quiet. "Today," she began, her voice steady yet warm, "we do not only seek justice for the wrongs committed, but also a chance for redemption, for those willing to walk the path honestly and with humility." Adamu stepped into the square, his head bowed in respect. The villagers reacted, some with anger, some with wary curiosity. He spoke, voice trembling yet sincere. "People of Kanyemba, I have come to acknowledge my mistakes. I have wronged not only individuals, but this community. I allowed greed, pride, and fear to guide my actions instead of wisdom and compassion." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I seek not only your forgiveness, but the chance to make amends, to restore what I have broken." A murmur spread through the crowd. Elders exchanged glances, recognizing the authenticity in Adamu's words, yet aware that redemption must be proven through action, not speech. Old Mbeni stepped forward, his voice strong and deliberate. "Words are seeds, but action's a harvest. If you truly seek redemption, Adamu, you must demonstrate it. Your journey begins now, in the service of those you have harmed and in the restoration of trust." Ayana nodded, stepping closer to Adamu. Redemption is not weakness, nor is it surrender, she said, her eyes meeting his. It is the courage to face your failures and to rise above them. The village will guide you, but it is your own heart that must change. Adamu knelt before the elders and the villagers, a gesture of humility rare for a man of his stature. "I am ready," he whispered. "I will work to rebuild, to serve and honor this village and its people." The first act of redemption was immediate. Adamu returned the wealth and gifts he had taken for himself, redistributing them fairly among the villagers who had suffered because of his pride and misjudgment. Families who had been cast aside or humiliated found their homes repaired, their debts repaid, and their dignity restored. Mothers wept quietly as they reclaimed what had been lost, while children watched in awe as the man who had once instilled fear now brought relief and support. Ayana organized gatherings to foster dialogue between those harmed and those seeking to make amends. Through storytelling, rituals, and shared labor in the fields, the villagers began to heal. They worked side by side, sowing seeds both literal and symbolic, planting the crops that would sustain them while nurturing the bonds broken by betrayal. During these days, Adamu labored humbly, carrying water, tending animals, and assisting the elders, all while reflecting deeply on his actions and learning from the wisdom shared by the community. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the air grew cool, Ayana and Adamu sat by the riverbank. The water reflected the fiery colors of the sunset, and the gentle sounds of crickets and frogs filled the silence. "The path is long," Ayana said, voice soft yet firm. "Redemption is not a single act, but a lifetime of integrity, patience, and respect. You must carry this in your heart always." Adamu nodded, watching the rippling water. "I understand now," he said, voice filled with sincerity. "I will not falter again. I will honor the village, the elders, and the people I have wronged. My wealth and status mean nothing compared to the trust and love of this community." As the days turned into weeks, the village witnessed the transformation of a man who had once been feared and despised. Adamu's genuine efforts, combined with the guidance of the elders and Ayana's leadership, allowed wounds to mend. Rituals of forgiveness were held, and symbolic gestures, planting trees, sharing meals, and storytelling circles, reinforced a renewal of community bonds. Yet the true test of redemption awaited. A neighboring village, hearing of Kanyemba's turmoil and recovery, sent representatives to observe and challenge the integrity of the village's resolutions. They questioned Adamu's sincerity, testing whether his actions were driven by true change or fear of reputation. In response, Adamu demonstrated humility and courage, addressing the neighboring elders with honesty and accountability. He recounted his failures, acknowledged their impact, and shared the steps he had taken toward restoration. His transparency impressed the visitors, proving that redemption was indeed underway. Back in Kanyemba, Ayana stood before the villagers, summarizing the journey. "We have witnessed the fall of pride and the rise of accountability," she said. "Redemption is not guaranteed, but when approached with sincerity, it becomes possible. Remember that justice is not only punishment, but also the opportunity to transform and heal." The villagers cheered softly, their hearts moved by the profound changes in both Adamu and their community. The air, once thick with anger and suspicion, now carried a sense of hope and renewal. Ayana's guidance, the elders' wisdom, and Adamu's laborious efforts had forged a new chapter for Kanyemba, one built on understanding, compassion, and the recognition that even those who stumble may rise again. Redemption is the harvest of humility, watered by action and patience. True justice lies not only in punishment, but in the courage to transform, to restore, and to heal. When the village gathers, not just to see, but to judge, the weight of truth falls upon all hearts. The sun was high over Kanyemba, yet a strange stillness hung in the air. The usual laughter of children and clatter of merchants was subdued. Today was the day the village would gather for judgment. Not a casual meeting, but a sacred assembly where truth, justice, and communal wisdom would be weighed. Drums beat softly in the distance, announcing the significance of the gathering, while smoke from ceremonial fires curled into the sky, carrying the scent of burning herbs and incense that spoke of purification and clarity. Ayana, dressed in a ceremonial chiton adorned with traditional beads and symbols of leadership, stood at the village square center. Elders surrounded her, forming a semicircle, their expressions grave and deliberate. Old Mbeni, whose voice could sway hearts, tapped his staff thrice on the ground, signaling the start of the assembly. Villagers assembled quietly, each carrying the weight of curiosity, anger, or hope. Some had been victims of Adamu's previous misdeeds, while others had only witnessed the chaos from afar. The assembly began with the reading of grievances, a tradition carried out in Kanyemba for generations. Ayana spoke first, her voice calm yet firm. Today, we bring forth the truth, not to humiliate but to heal. Every action has a consequence, and every wrong must find its rightful answer. She gestured at Adamu, who stood humbly, head bowed but eyes alert, ready to face the judgment of the village he had wronged. A young mother stepped forward, cradling her infant. He abandoned us when we needed him most, she said, voice quivering. Our children went hungry, and we were shamed. He must be held accountable. The crowd murmured in agreement, some shaking their heads in anger, others lowering their gaze in sorrow. Adamu's heart tightened at her words, each one piercing like a spear. An elder, Mama Kesai, called for silence. Before judgment is passed, she said, we must remember that justice in Kanyemba is not vengeance. It is truth, accountability, and the opportunity for repair. Speak your hearts, but also hear the repentance that follows. Adamu then stepped forward. His voice, though soft, carried sincerity. I have caused pain and shame. I have let greed and pride blind my heart. I do not seek to erase the past, for it shapes the lessons I must learn. But I am ready to face the consequences, to restore trust, and serve this community for as long as I live. The villagers listened, some skeptical, some moved by the humility in his words. Then the elders began questioning, as tradition dictated. They asked not only about the material harms, stolen crops, wealth, and homes, but about the emotional wounds, betrayal, shame, and erosion of trust. Adamu answered with honesty, recounting his misdeeds in detail, refusing to evade responsibility or offer excuses. As the questioning continued, the elders also evaluated the acts of restitution Adamu had undertaken since Section 11. Families whose homes had been repaired, debts repaid, and livelihoods restored were asked to share their experiences. A young boy spoke. He helped us rebuild our market stall, even though he had wronged my father. Now, I see him working alongside us, not above us. His words brought nods of approval from several villagers, though suspicion still lingered in many eyes. The ceremonial drums increased in intensity, signaling the assembly's climax. Ayana raised her hand, calling for a pause. The truth, she said, cannot be measured only by actions or words alone. It is reflected in the heart, in the willingness to accept consequence, to seek repair and to honor the community. She motioned to a sacred wooden box at the center of the square, carved with ancestral symbols. Inside were tokens representing each grievance, the items stolen, broken, or lost, and Adamu was asked to touch each one, acknowledging the harm done. One by one, Adamu knelt and touched the tokens, reciting aloud his acknowledgement. This loss was mine to prevent. This pain was mine to shield. I accept the burden and seek to restore. The villagers watched, many with tears in their eyes, witnessing the tangible act of accountability. Even those most skeptical felt a shift in the energy around them. Humility, they realized, was a power far greater than pride or wealth. Then came the most challenging part, the final testimonies. Elders allowed those directly wronged to voice the deepest pains, moments that had been hidden in silence. A young woman, once shunned for her perceived weakness, spoke of the shame she had endured when Adamu mocked her father and expelled her family from the village market. Adamu's voice trembled as he responded, I cannot undo the pain, but I can dedicate my life to ensuring it never happens again. I ask only for the chance to prove my commitment. A hush fell over the square as all waited for the elder's judgment. Old Mbeni's eyes swept over the villagers, gauging their response. Finally, he spoke, voice deep and commanding. In Kanyemba, the path of justice is neither swift nor cruel. It requires reflection, action, and sincerity. Adamu has demonstrated humility, accountability, and effort to restore what he broke. He has touched the heart of the community, not through wealth, but through service. Yet, redemption is a journey, not a verdict. Mama Kesai added. He must continue to labor for the village, uphold fairness, and guide the young with wisdom. Only then will full reconciliation be achieved. The village watches not only to forgive, but to ensure the future remains protected. Adamu bowed deeply. I accept, he said, voice resolute. I will work not for praise, but to honor the trust given to me. Every day I will strive to rebuild not only what I took, but the faith I damaged. Ayana concluded the gathering, her voice carrying both authority and warmth. Let this day mark a turning point. Let the village remember that truth, accountability, and courage are the pillars of our community. Those who seek redemption may find it, but only through sincere action and unwavering commitment. As the assembly dispersed, villagers lingered, speaking quietly among themselves. Many approached Adamu, offering cautious words of encouragement, while others simply observed, weighing the sincerity of his efforts. The ceremonial drums faded into the afternoon sun, and the fires that had burned for clarity were allowed to die down naturally, leaving a sense of renewal in the air. The judgment had been delivered, but the story was far from over. Redemption was underway, but only time would reveal the lasting consequences of actions, both past and present. Ayana, watching from the steps of the elder's hut, reflected on the delicate balance between justice and mercy. She knew that the coming days would test the village, and the lessons of this gathering would echo for generations. Justice is not final until hearts are mended. In the village, judgment is both a reckoning and a seed for redemption, watched by eyes that remember every deed. The time of reckoning has arrived. Every secret, every action, every heart will face its ultimate test. The sun was beginning to set over Kanyemba, painting the sky with hues of gold, crimson, and violet, as if the heavens themselves were bearing witness to momentous events unfolding below. The villagers had gathered once more in the great square, this time for a test unlike any before. Today, the truth that had been hidden, the secrets that had festered in silence, and the hearts weighed down by betrayal will be confronted. The air was thick with anticipation, and even the wind seemed to pause in respect. Ayana, standing on a raised platform, addressed the assembly with a voice steady yet resonant, carrying both authority and deep compassion. Today, we do not merely witness events. We participate in the unveiling of hearts. Every action will reveal itself. Every intention will face scrutiny, and the path of each soul will be illuminated. Adamu stepped forward, shoulders squared, yet a tremor in his hands betrayed the tension he felt. This was the moment that would define not only his redemption, but also the legacy he would leave in Kanyemba. Around him, villagers whispered, some with hope, others with doubt, and a few with unresolved anger that still burned within. The elders had devised a test rooted in the village's traditions, a series of challenges designed to measure sincerity, courage, and accountability. Each challenge was symbolic, reflecting the values that sustained the community for generations. The first involved entering the sacred forest at the village outskirts, where Adamu had to face a series of trials representing past wrongs. The forest was alive with the sounds of insects and distant calls of wild animals, but the silence within his heart was far louder. He knelt before the ancient baobab tree, whose roots were rumored to be as old as the village itself. Placing his hand upon the gnarled bark, he whispered the names of those he had wronged, acknowledging each deed with unwavering honesty. The ritual demanded reflection and courage, and the villagers observed quietly, sensing the gravity of the moment. To acknowledge the past is the first step toward changing the future. Ayana's voice echoed from the platform, a reminder that wisdom often spoke through tradition. The second challenge required Adamu to retrieve 3 sacred tokens from the river, a task demanding both physical strength and mental fortitude. Each token represented a broken trust, a stolen livelihood, or a shattered bond. As he waded into the cool waters, the villagers watched in tense silence. The river, shimmering with reflections of the fading sun, seemed to test him at every step, currents tugging at his resolve, much like the consequences of his past actions tugged at his conscience. When he returned with the tokens, he presented them to the elders, kneeling once more. I have carried not just these tokens, but the weight of my misdeeds, he declared, voice strong despite exhaustion. The elders nodded, some in approval, others still assessing the depth of his sincerity. They knew that redemption was earned, not granted, and that the final judgment would depend on both courage and the genuine intention to repair. The climax of the test involved confronting the very individuals who had suffered under his actions. One by one, they stepped forward, wives abandoned, children left hungry, families forced into hardship. Each confrontation was raw, emotionally charged, and unflinching. Adamu knelt before them, hands clasped in humility. "I cannot undo the pain I have caused," he said, voice heavy with emotion. "But I vow to dedicate my life to restoring what was broken and honoring the trust one betrayed." Tears streamed down the cheeks of those he had harmed. Some embraced him cautiously, sensing a sincerity that had been absent before. Others remained distant, their hearts still guarded. Yet, even in the face of skepticism, a change began to stir, a shift in perception, a glimmer of hope that the path of redemption was real, though arduous. The elders now approached, their steps deliberate. Old Mbeni raised his staff and addressed the assembly. "A man's worth is not measured by the mistakes he makes, but by the courage he demonstrates in facing them. Today, Adamu has faced the trials set forth by tradition, by community, and by conscience. The final measure of his redemption lies not in words, but in actions that will follow." Suddenly, from the shadows of the gathering, a surprising figure emerged. Ayana's younger sister, Amara, whose keen observation had uncovered a hidden truth days earlier. She stepped forward with evidence that could either redeem or condemn. In her hands was a bundle of documents and letters that revealed the final layer of Adamu's actions, efforts he had made in secret to repay debts, rebuild homes, and protect families from further suffering. The villagers gasped as Amara laid them on the platform. Each page told a story of courage, selflessness, and quiet perseverance, actions that had gone unnoticed until now. Adamu looked at the documents, humbled, realizing that his attempts at redemption were finally visible to those who mattered most. The villagers leaned in, reading with a mixture of shock and admiration. For many, this was a revelation. For others, a confirmation of a heart striving to change. The tension in the air was palpable, the suspense almost unbearable. Would the community accept him fully? Would the past ever truly forgive him? The elders convened briefly in hushed discussion, their faces illuminated by the dying sunlight. The final judgment was imminent, but before pronouncement, Ayana called for silence. "Every heart here has witnessed courage, remorse, and effort. Let the community speak through their presence and voices. Redemption is not given lightly, nor is it earned by display alone. It is lived and proven through daily deeds." One by one, villagers expressed their thoughts. Some recounted the tangible acts of restitution, homes rebuilt, debts repaid, and support given to struggling families. Others highlighted the subtle unseen actions, the kindness shown in silence, the protection offered discreetly, the humility demonstrated amidst shame. Each testimony weighed heavily on the assembly, reinforcing the complexity of justice, mercy, and human change. As the last light of day faded into the horizon, old Mbeni raised his voice above the murmurs. "Adamu has faced the trials of heart, action, and courage. He has not hidden from truth nor shirked responsibility. The village recognizes his efforts, and though the wounds he caused cannot be erased, the path to reconciliation is now open. Let this be a reminder. Redemption is a labor of the soul, and begins with honesty, courage, and service to others." Ayana stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the square. "Let it be known that this assembly has judged not only actions, but intentions and perseverance. Adamu, rise, for the village acknowledges your courage and sincerity. Yet remember, the journey is ongoing. Each day will test your commitment, and the eyes of Kanyemba will watch not just what you say, but what you live." In Kanyemba, the final test does not end with judgment alone. It begins a journey of redemption. Every heart that faces truth must prove itself in the days that follow. The storms have passed, but the ripples remain. In the heart of Kanyemba, healing begins, though scars of the past still whisper. The first light of dawn broke over Kanyemba, painting the village in soft, golden hues that promise renewal, yet whisper the lessons carried from yesterday. The square, which had been a stage of judgment and confrontation, now bore the quiet hum of recovery. Villagers moved slowly, some still murmuring about the events of the night before, others assisting in cleaning the remnants of the grand assembly. The air smelled of smoke from evening fires and the lingering scent of crushed flowers used in the ceremonial rituals, a fragrant reminder of truth revealed and hearts tested. Adamu walked through the village pathways, each step heavy with reflection. The village had spoken, the elders had judged, and the community had witnessed the truth of his heart. Now the weight shifted from punishment to responsibility, the responsibility to live honorably, to prove that the courage shown in the trial was not fleeting, and that the promises spoken in the shadow of the baobab tree would endure. The first task he undertook was to visit those he had wronged most severely. Each home was a testimony of past injustice. The abandoned children, the families evicted from their lands, the wives left humiliated. Adamu knelt at each doorstep, offering gifts of restitution, rebuilding materials and tokens of apology. Yet, the most important offerings were his words, each spoken with sincerity. I cannot undo the pain I caused, but I promise to walk with you, to serve you, and to honor the trust one betrayed. In the village market, murmurs of his actions spread quickly. Traders paused their bartering, and mothers holding children whispered in awe. Did you see him? He returned every coin he owed and even helped rebuild the granary. One woman said, her voice a mixture of astonishment and cautious admiration. Another added, I never believed he could change, but the boy who abandoned his own kin now walks with humility. Such whispers, once cruel and scornful, now reflected a glimmer of restored faith. Ayana observed from the veranda of her family home, the wind gently tugging at the fabric of her robe. She saw the transformation not merely in Adamu's actions, but in the atmosphere of the village itself. The people, once tense and divided, now engaged in quiet acts of reconciliation. Children played freely again in the village square, their laughter echoing like a balm over the wounds left by betrayal. Elders offered counsel to those still uncertain, reminding everyone that forgiveness is a journey, not an instant miracle. One pivotal moment came at the riverbank, where Adamu had retrieved the sacred tokens during the final trial. Here, he gathered the village youth and spoke to them of responsibility, integrity, and the consequences of dishonesty. The forest, the river, and the elders tested me, he said, eyes glinting with newfound understanding. I learned that courage is not only in facing enemies, but in confronting oneself. Each action, each decision, carries weight beyond the moment. The choices you make today will echo tomorrow. The children listened, rapt, absorbing the lessons with wide-eyed attention. Some nodded solemnly. Others whispered their intentions to walk paths of honor. Meanwhile, Amara and Ayana worked together to heal the relationships fractured in previous weeks. They organized gatherings where neighbors reconciled, where women who had suffered humiliation could voice their pain and be heard. These gatherings were infused with the wisdom of African traditions. Proverbs recited, songs of healing sung around the fires, and offerings made to the ancestors to bless the reconciliations. Even the strongest tree bends to the wind. Ayana reminded those present, so too must hearts bend to humility, understanding, and compassion. Adamu's own household was now a center of quiet activity. He began rebuilding the home he had abandoned, carefully restoring walls, repairing thatch roofs, and planting gardens that would feed his children and neighbors alike. Each brick laid, each seed sown, was a tangible act of redemption. He labored with humility, guided by the village's elders, and the rhythmic beat of drums from distant ceremonies lent both encouragement and reflection to his efforts. Yet, not all wounds healed immediately. There were still villagers who watched Adamu with skepticism, their mistrust like thorn vines. Some refused to engage, wary of false repentance. Others demanded accountability through continued deeds rather than words. Adamu accepted this, understanding that redemption is proven over time. He welcomed the challenge, seeing it as a final measure of his transformation. One day, as he labored in the fields, old Mbeni approached him, staff in hand, eyes sharp yet softened with the wisdom of age. Your journey is far from complete, Adamu, he said. Healing is like the river. It flows slowly, reshaping stones over years. Do not rush the process, nor expect instant trust. Let your actions speak louder than any proclamation. Adamu bowed deeply, feeling both the weight and the guidance of those words. In the evenings, The village gathered for storytelling, a tradition that carried lessons across generations. Around the fire, elders recounted tales of courage, loyalty, and redemption. Adamu listened intently, absorbing every proverb, every lesson. He who plants the seed of truth, though late, shall harvest wisdom beyond measure. Old Mbeni recited, and the villagers nodded in agreement. These stories reminded all present that while punishment may reveal faults, resolution comes from learning, humility, and sustained effort. As days turned into weeks, the village began to breathe as one again. The market buzzed with renewed vigor. Homes were repaired, and children's laughter filled every corner. Adamu, though still mindful of past mistakes, had grown into a leader of action rather than one of mere words. He continued to assist neighbors, mediate disputes, and offer guidance to younger villagers, his presence becoming a steady pillar of reliability and compassion. Yet, even in this apparent calm, a lingering sense of suspense remained, an acknowledgement that the journey of reconciliation and redemption is continuous. The village understood that every heart, including Adamu's, must remain vigilant against pride, greed, or complacency. And so, the days that followed were infused with both healing and watchfulness, a delicate balance that defined the essence of Kanyemba's wisdom. By the end of the month, the community convened once more around the baobab tree, this time not for judgment but for a celebration of resilience. The drums sounded in joyful rhythm. Fires burned brightly, and the children performed dances learned from their ancestors, symbolizing growth, renewal, and harmony. Adamu and those he had wronged stood together, smiles tentative but genuine, recognizing that while the scars of the past remained, the path forward was now one of unity and hope. In Kanyemba, the storms may pass, but the echoes remain. Healing begins not with a single act, but with a lifetime of courage, humility, and steadfast devotion to the truth. The tale of Kanyemba comes to its final chapter, yet its echoes linger, teaching us truths that reach beyond any single heart or home. The village of Kanyemba was quiet in the early morning, bathed in soft amber light that filtered through the leaves of the towering baobab trees. The people had returned to their routines, yet the memory of the trials, betrayals, and reconciliation still resonated in every home. Adamu walked along the worn path to the village square, reflecting on the journey that had begun in darkness and deception and had now arrived at understanding and unity. In the heart of Kanyemba, the elders had convened one last gathering, not to judge, but to cement the lessons learned. Around the fire, villagers, young and old, sat in anticipation. The flames flickered like the pulses of the community's shared heart, and smoke curled into the morning sky, carrying with it prayers of gratitude and hope. It was here that the moral of the story would be shared, the wisdom etched into the lives of all who had witnessed the unfolding drama. Adamu stood before them, humbled yet resolute. His voice, steady but carrying the weight of the months past, broke the silence. "I have learned," he began, "that a man's wealth is not measured in gold or land, but in the honor he carries, the compassion he shows, and the courage with which he faces his own heart. Every choice we make echoes through the lives of those around us." Ayana, seated beside the elders, nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. She added softly, "We all falter. The strongest among us stumble. But it is in the rising that we find our true measure. In humility we are reborn. In forgiveness we are freed. And in truth we are made whole." The villagers listened intently as old Mbeni, the village sage, rose to speak. Leaning on his staff, his eyes twinkling with the knowledge of countless seasons, he addressed the assembly. "In the life of Kanyemba, we have seen betrayal, greed, and pride. Yet we have also seen courage, honesty, and the power of the human heart to heal. Remember this. He who hides the truth in fear will stumble in shadow, but he who embraces it in courage will walk in light." As the elder spoke, Adamu reflected on the faces of those around him, his neighbors, his friends, the families he wronged, and those who had suffered alongside him. Each gaze carried a story, each nod a silent acknowledgement of shared pain and shared triumph. The village itself had transformed, becoming a living testament to the lessons learned through hardship and revelation. He recalled the moments of darkness, when deceit had clouded his judgment and pride had blinded his heart. He remembered the nights of despair, when the whispers of the villagers felt like knives against the soul. And yet, he also remembered the glimmers of hope, the acts of kindness extended to him, the unwavering guidance of the elders, and the quiet strength of those he had wronged who chose to believe in redemption. It was then that the village drummer began a slow, deliberate rhythm, each beat resonating like the pulse of the land itself. The people rose, joining in the circle around the fire, their movements deliberate and unified. Traditional dances followed, movements that told stories of resilience, of endurance, of human connection. Children laughed, mothers hummed ancient songs, and even the elders, with joints stiffened by time, swayed in rhythm, letting the music carry away the last remnants of bitterness. Adamu's gaze fell on Ayana, who stood proudly at the circle's edge. She had been a constant source of guidance and strength, her wisdom guiding him through the thickets of deceit and despair. Together, they led the village in a ceremonial planting of seeds at the center of the square, a symbolic gesture of renewal, growth, and the life that emerges after trials. Each seed was a promise of honesty, courage, and a commitment to walk a path of righteousness. The community watched in quiet reverence as the seeds were covered with soil, hands joining across the circle, binding the villagers not only in action, but in spirit. Adamu spoke softly, yet his voice carried over the murmurs of the assembly. May these seeds remind us always that even after the harshest seasons, life will bloom again. Let each of us nurture the truth, protect it, and let it guide our hearts. As the sun reached its peak, the shadows of the baobab tree stretched across the square, casting a canopy of light and darkness, a metaphor for life itself. The villagers understood that the journey of Kanyemba was not merely a story of punishment and restitution, but a living lesson in the eternal dance of right and wrong, pride and humility, betrayal and forgiveness. Old Mbeni raised his staff once more, calling for silence. Let this be remembered, he said, voice strong despite his age, that no heart is too lost, no mistake too grave, that it cannot be mended by courage, honesty, and humility. And remember the proverb of our ancestors, even the tallest tree is bent by the wind, yet its roots hold it firm. The villagers echoed the words, a chant that rose with the wind and carried across the fields and rivers beyond Kanyemba. There was laughter, tears, and quiet reflection all at once, a symphony of human emotion. Adamu knelt and planted the final seed himself, the soil warm and rich beneath his fingers, and whispered a prayer for guidance, for strength, and for the wisdom to live with integrity. As night fell, lanterns were lit across the village, casting a warm glow over the homes, the market, and the pathways that led to the river. The people of Kanyemba felt a renewed sense of unity, their hearts lighter, yet mindful of the lessons carved deeply into their lives. Stories of betrayal and redemption, of mistakes and forgiveness, would be passed down from one generation to the next, ensuring that the wisdom of this journey would never be forgotten. Adamu looked at the horizon, where the first stars shimmered like distant fires of guidance. He understood, finally, that life's most profound truths were not found in wealth or power, but in the courage to face oneself, the humility to accept one's faults, and the strength to seek redemption not just for oneself, but for the community. In Kanyemba, hearts are tested, truths are revealed, and even the gravest mistakes are healed by courage and humility. Remember, my children, he who walks with truth need fear no shadow, and he who plants seeds of courage will harvest wisdom for generations. Let this tale linger, and let its lessons guide your steps, as the baobab watches silently over all.